Hello friends, this is Fatali sir. I welcome you all on my YouTube channel, that is Fatali sir's Your Guide Academy. So friends, in first part of the video we have studied part 1 of the lesson A Triumph of Surgery, and now we are going to study the second part of the lesson A Triumph of Surgery. But before that, I have a small request to all of you. If you haven't subscribed my channel, please like, share and subscribe it. So let's start. Reading of the second part. Dear students, let's read the second part. I tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on very strict diet. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I'm sure you are right. But it is so difficult, so very difficult. She set off head down along the road, as if determined to put the new resume into practice immediately. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along his little tweed coat. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats for the cold weather and a raincoat for wet days. He struggled on, drooping in his harness. I thought it would be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. The expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he had bouts of vomiting. He spent all his time laying on a rug panting, didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. The poor lady almost soon. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill, and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it is best to take him without delay. And followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings, I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. Now I am explaining second part of this lesson. The narrator tried to talk seriously to Mrs. Pumphrey that if she did not control Tricky's eating habits and increased his exercise, he would soon fall ill. He told her that she should stay strong and strict with him and put him on diet. Mrs. Pumphrey accepted that, although she knew that Mr. Harriet was right, but it was too difficult for her to refuse him for anything. But then she left the place as if she was now ready to follow the new routine properly. Mr. Harriet was watching them go, looking at Tricky walking unsteadily. The narrator was also looking at the tweed coat that Tricky was wearing. He had a wardrobe full of these coats and also a raincoat for rainy days. This line also suggested that Mrs. Pumphrey was a rich lady as she had a lot of money to spend on her dog. But the narrator knew that soon he would be receiving a call about Tricky falling ill, and it came. The call after a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was very upset as Tricky was not eating anything, not even his favorite dishes, and was vomiting frequently. He didn't even want to do anything. Being a veterinary doctor, the narrator knew that the only way to get Tricky well was to get him out of house for a few days. He then suggested to Mrs. Pumphrey that it would be good to get Tricky hospitalized and keep him under observation for 15 days. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Pumphrey nearly fainted. She was sure that if Tricky did not see her every day, he would surely die. But the narrator kept his words. He told her that this was the only option as Tricky was very ill. The narrator thought it would be best to avoid any delay and get him to the hospital as soon as possible. He went to their house, and even though Mrs. Pumphrey was crying because she did not want her dog to go away from her, he took the dog, wrapped it in a blanket, and put him in the car. Let's read the third part of this lesson. The entire staff was roused, and maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys, and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. I patted the head of the Tricky, made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, I said. You haven't a kick in you, but I think I know cure for you. At the surgery, the household dogs searched around me. The Tricky looked down at the noisy pack of with dull eyes and, when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing around him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. I made up a bed for him in warm, loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dog moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowl. There was the unusual headlong rush, followed by the sounds of high speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. Now I'm explaining the third part of this lesson. The maids were then woken up and asked to get out all the Tricky stuff. His stuff included things like his day bed, night bed, favorite cushions, toys, rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, and his snack bowl. Mr. Harriet knew that so much stuff won't be fit in his car, so he started rushing things. As the doctor was leaving with Tricky, Mrs. Pumphrey threw a lot of coats that Tricky used to wear in the car. As the narrator was turning the car on the turn, he saw through the rear mirror that everyone was crying. He patted the little helpless animal, who responded by wagging his tail. The narrator then thought and told Tricky that he knew that Tricky did not have any energy, but he surely had a way to get him better. As soon as they reached the hospital, all the other dogs gathered around the doctor. The Tricky looked at all of them, and when the doctor put him down on the carpet, he couldn't even move. The other dogs then sniffed him and thought to themselves that he was a very uninteresting object and that there was no use standing there, and left. Then the narrator made the bed for Tricky. in a warm box along with the other dogs. For 2 days, the narrator kept him just on the water and nothing else. On the second day, he roamed around looking at the place around him, and on the third day, he was also making noise to let the people in the hospital know that he too wanted to go out with the other dogs.